The air in the ballroom tasted like forced smiles and expensive perfume, a heavy, sweet current carrying the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. My own glass felt cold in my hand, the condensation slicking my palm. Spotlights painted shifting patterns across the polished floor where a few couples drifted in slow, careful dances. This was my mother's world, a place I visited only under duress, a gilded cage filled with people who measured success in square footage and social standing. I was standing by a large, draped window, looking out at the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white against the inky black sky. It felt like a different dimension out there, one where I actually belonged, where my own kind of success, built quietly, brick by painstaking brick, meant something. In here, I was just present, an accessory to my mother's grand design. She found me by the window, of course. She always found me. Her voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp yet layered with a syrupy sweetness that was far more dangerous than outright anger. "Oh, there you are," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She gestured vaguely at my dress, a simple, elegant cut I thought was appropriate. "Still dressing like you're hiding?" Honestly. A tight knot formed in my stomach, familiar and unwelcome. It was the same knot that had lived there for decades, tightening whenever she looked at me with that particular expression, disappointment, thinly veiled as concern. She didn't wait for me to respond, drawing closer, lowering her voice just enough so only I could hear, though I felt the eyes of a nearby couple linger for a beat longer than necessary. "I just spoke to the Tremaines. Their boy, Marcus, you remember him? Graduated top of his class, now running that tech firm, made millions before 30. And his sister, Clara? Head of oncology research. Both married so well. Making their parents so proud." She paused, taking a slow sip of her wine, her gaze sweeping over me again, cataloging every perceived imperfection. "Such lovely, accomplished children. It's just heartbreaking, isn't it? When your own, well," she let the sentence trail off, the unspoken judgment hanging heavy in the air between us. "When your own turned out like you." That was the subtext, the constant hum beneath every conversation, every passive-aggressive comment, every backhanded compliment disguised as critique. When your own failed to meet the standard, failed to provide the expected return on investment. The knot twisted tighter, a hot coal expanding in my chest. I felt the familiar flush creeping up my neck, the urge to shrink, to disappear. But beneath the heat, something else was stirring tonight. Something cold. Something resolute. I didn't just feel hurt anymore. I felt observed. Judged by a panel I hadn't agreed to be a part of. Found wanting by a jury whose verdict was rigged from the start. And I was tired of it. So tired of the shame, the constant feeling of falling short in her eyes, no matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I tried to build a life that felt authentic and true to me. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. It truly helps me bring more of these stories to life. Thank you. My life had always felt like a subtle act of rebellion against the blueprint my mother had drawn for me before I was even born. It was a life lived mostly outside the gilded cage, building something she didn't understand, something she couldn't control. While she curated her world of galas and social committees, I was poring over spreadsheets, analyzing markets, taking calculated risks, failing sometimes, learning always, and slowly, painstakingly, building an empire of my own design. Not built on inherited wealth or strategically advantageous marriages, but on sheer grit, late nights fueled by cheap coffee, and a relentless belief in my own vision. I wasn't running a flashy tech startup or curing cancer, but I had built a portfolio piece by piece that had grown into something substantial. More than substantial. The invitation to this gala had arrived weeks ago, a stiff cardstock rectangle with embossed lettering. The annual fundraiser for the Sterling Legacy Foundation, my parents' pet charity project, dedicated to preserving historical landmarks. A cause my mother championed with the same ferocity she applied to everything else she deemed worthy of her attention, which mostly meant things that burnished the family name and provided opportunities for photo ops. My initial instinct was to decline. The thought of an entire evening navigating the treacherous waters of my mother's expectations and the polite, probing questions of her circle filled me with dread. Every conversation felt like an interrogation, disguised as pleasantries. "Still doing that?" they'd ask, referring to my work, whatever specific venture I was focused on at the time, their tone implying it was a temporary hobby before I settled into a proper life, whatever that meant. But then the email arrived. Not from my mother, but from the foundation itself. A generic update, listing key initiatives, upcoming events, and a section acknowledging their major donors. As I scanned the list, a name caught my eye. A holding company I recognized. One that had recently made a significant, anonymous contribution to the foundation. My fingers paused over the keyboard. I did some digging. Quietly. Discreetly. What I found changed everything. The anonymous donor wasn't just a wealthy individual or corporation supporting a cause. They had invested strategically, leveraging their contribution not just for a tax write-off and social credit, but for a position. Influence. The Gala invitation sat on my desk, a silent challenge. Going meant subjecting myself to the usual scrutiny, the subtle barbs, the heavy cloak of parental disappointment. Not going meant avoiding the discomfort, but also missing an opportunity. Not an opportunity for social redemption, I didn't care about that. But an opportunity to finally, definitively, shatter the narrative my mother had so carefully constructed about me. An opportunity to show her and everyone else that her assessment was not only wrong, but fundamentally irrelevant. I RSVP'd yes. The weeks leading up to the event were a blur of work, but beneath the surface, my mind was turning. The information I had uncovered about the anonymous donor had sparked an idea, a dangerous, exhilarating possibility. It required careful planning, absolute secrecy, and leveraging every resource I had built. It meant putting my own carefully guarded privacy on the line, stepping into the very spotlight I usually avoided. It meant facing down the dragon in her lair. The night of the gala arrived. I spent hours getting ready, not out of vanity, but as a form of armor. The dress, the minimal makeup, the simple jewelry, it was a deliberate choice to present myself not as someone seeking approval, but someone who was already complete. Walking into the ballroom was like stepping onto a stage. The air shifted, the energy changed. I felt the eyes, the polite curiosity, the silent comparisons being made. My father offered a brief, awkward hug, his eyes distant, already consumed by the evening's formalities. My mother was immediately critical of my appearance, of the time I arrived, of my apparent lack of enthusiasm. The evening was a series of small, sharp cuts, each one a reminder of the narrative she clung to. The Tremaine's children. Marcus, the golden boy. Clara, the brilliant doctor. The constant refrain, sometimes spoken, often just implied, "Why couldn't you be more like them?" I endured the cocktail hour, the awkward conversations, the forced smiles. I watched my mother glide through the room, a picture of effortless charm and social power, the matriarch presiding over her domain. She introduced me to people, always with a carefully worded preface that highlighted her own connection to the foundation, to the cause, while subtly downplaying my presence, slotting me into the familiar role of the slightly offspring who came along. Then came the dinner. Seated at a table that felt both too close and too far from the main stage, I listened as speakers extolled the foundation's virtues, its history, its impact. My parents were acknowledged, of course, pioneers, champions, their names synonymous with the cause. And then, during a brief pause before the main program, my mother cornered me again, her voice low and conspiratorial, but with an edge of pure steel. This was the moment she chose to deliver the final, public enough to wound blow. She leaned in, her eyes scanning the room, even as she spoke to me. "You know," she began, her smile fixed, "it's wonderful to see so many successful people here tonight, people who understand the importance of giving back, people who have truly made something of themselves. It just makes you think, doesn't it? About potential, and how some people just never quite reach theirs, no matter how much you try to help them." The words landed not like a blow, but like poison. Slow-acting, insidious, designed to spread through the bloodstream and rot you from the inside out. Some people just never quite reach theirs. It wasn't just a critique, it was a dismissal. A declaration that I was, and always would be, a disappointment. A failure in the grand scheme of her life's work, which seemed to be producing perfect, socially acceptable offspring. The knot in my chest didn't just tighten, it solidified into a rock. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a mother expressing concern, but an architect of my inadequacy, constantly chipping away at my self-worth to maintain her own sense of superiority. The forced sweetness, the public setting, the casual cruelty, it was a masterpiece of passive aggression. And for a moment, just a flicker, I felt the familiar urge to crumble, to retreat, to let the shame wash over me and drown me. But then I remembered the endless nights working, the risks I took, the quiet victories she never saw, never acknowledged. Remembered the power I had built, not for show, but for purpose. And remembered the information I held. The cold resolve that had begun to stir earlier in the evening solidified into something hard and unyielding. The hot coal in my chest turned to ice. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away, didn't flinch. A quiet calm settled over me, the stillness before a storm. She didn't see it, of course. She was already turning away, satisfied she had landed her blow, moving on to network, to perform her role as the gracious, accomplished hostess. I remained by the window for a few more minutes, the city lights outside a silent witness to the battle raging within me. The poison she injected wasn't reaching its intended target. Instead, it was fueling something else. Something dangerous. The script she had written for me, the one where I was the eternal underachiever, the source of her quiet sorrow, felt fragile, ready to be torn apart. I looked around the ballroom again, seeing the faces, some genuinely kind, some indifferent, many performing their own roles in this elaborate social theater. They saw me through her eyes, through the lens she had provided. That perception was about to change. Drastically. My mind raced, not with pain, but with calculation. Every detail of my plan clicked into place. The timing had to be perfect. The presentation had to be flawless. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming my narrative, not through words, but through an undeniable act. It was about demonstrating, in the most public way possible, that I had not just survived her constant judgment, but thrived despite it. Thrived in a way she couldn't even comprehend. The main program began. The Master of Ceremonies, a local television personality known for his smooth delivery and charming smile, took the stage. He spoke eloquently about the Foundation's mission, its impact on the community, the importance of preserving history for future generations. My parents beamed from the head table, the picture of philanthropic virtue. I watched them, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me, the lingering ache of past hurts, the cold satisfaction of the imminent reveal, the underlying sadness that it had come to this. That the only way to be truly seen, truly acknowledged, was through a public act of defiance that also happened to be an act of immense generosity towards a cause I genuinely believed in. Yes, I believed in the cause. That was the crucial part. This wasn't just revenge. It wasn't just about humiliating my mother. It was about leveraging the power I had built for something good, something meaningful. The irony was not lost on me. The vehicle for my ultimate vindication was the very thing my parents used to bolster their social standing, the very thing that brought them together with the very people who judged me. The MC reached the segment about the evening's fundraising success. He announced totals, highlighted specific initiatives that would be funded by the money raised tonight. The tension in the room was palpable, the quiet anticipation of the big reveal, the lead donors. This was it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that had fallen over the ballroom. Every eye was on the stage. My mother sat straighter in her chair, a look of proud expectation on her face. This was her moment, the culmination of her efforts. She was about to be recognized, celebrated. She had no idea what was coming. The MC cleared his throat, a small sound amplified by the microphone. "And now," he announced, his voice swelling with dramatic effect, "we come to the cornerstone of this year's campaign. The incredible generosity of our lead donor, whose contribution has elevated our efforts to a level we only dreamed of." He paused, letting the anticipation build. I took a slow, steadying breath. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken energy. I could feel my mother's gaze on the stage, eager, triumphant. "This year," the MC continued, a wide smile spreading across his face, "the Sterling Legacy Foundation is profoundly grateful for the unparalleled support from—" He looked down at the card in his hand, then back up at the audience, his smile softening slightly, a note of genuine warmth entering his voice. "From a remarkable individual who believes deeply in our mission and has stepped forward to make a truly transformative impact. This donor wishes to remain largely private, but has allowed us the immense honor of announcing their name tonight as the driving force behind our success." He paused again, letting the words sink in. A remarkable individual. Private. Driving force. My mother was probably scanning the room in her mind, running through the list of usual suspects, the prominent families, the wealthy industrialists. She would never think of looking for me. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC declared, his voice ringing out across the hushed ballroom, "please join me in acknowledging and celebrating the lead investor in the Sterling Legacy Foundation for this year." He paused for a beat that felt like an eternity, his eyes sweeping over the audience, finally landing somewhere in my general direction, though I couldn't be sure he was looking at me. My own gaze was fixed on my mother. Her smile was still in place, expectant, ready for the announcement of a name she approved of, a name that fit her narrative. Then, the MC said it. "The name. My name. My name." The sound echoed in the sudden, stunned silence of the ballroom. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The name hung in the air, a foreign object in that space. Then, a ripple, a collective intake of breath. Heads began to turn, first slowly, then faster, searching for the source of the name. They landed on me, sitting quietly at my table, a small, calm island in the sea of shock. My mother's reaction was instantaneous. Her smile vanished, replaced by utter disbelief. Her eyes, wide and staring, darted from the stage to me. A small, choked gasp escaped her lips. Then, the disbelief curdled into something else, confusion, then dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated rage. She shot up from her chair, the movement sharp and sudden, overturning a water glass that shattered on the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "What?" she screamed, the single word ripping through the formal atmosphere, raw and piercing. It wasn't a question. It was an eruption. Her face was contorted, scarlet with fury and humiliation. "That's impossible. It can't be." All eyes were on her now and then on me. The MC on stage looked momentarily flustered, but quickly recovered, launching into a prepared statement about my generosity and commitment to the cause. But no one was listening to him. They were watching the drama unfolding at the table. My father was frozen, his face ashen, caught between his wife's public meltdown and the undeniable reality of the announcement. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply met my mother's furious gaze, a quiet, almost serene expression on my face. The ice in my chest spread, cold and clean. This wasn't just a victory. It was an exorcism. Every past slight, every dismissed achievement, every moment of feeling inadequate under her gaze, it all coalesced in that single, shattering moment. The woman who had publicly shamed me minutes ago was now publicly screaming because my name, the name she associated with disappointment, was being celebrated as the savior of her cherished project. Her hand trembled, pointing at me across the table. "You. How could you? You did this. To me." Her voice was hoarse, on the verge of breaking. The self-absorption was breathtaking. Even now, it wasn't about the charity, about the impact, about the money itself. It was about her, about how this reflected on her. I finally spoke, my voice low and steady, cutting through the chaos she had created. It wasn't amplified by a microphone, but in the sudden, stunned quiet that followed her outburst, it carried clearly to those nearest us. "Yes, Mother," I said, my gaze never leaving hers. "I did." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "While you were busy deciding what kind of person I was supposed to be," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet strength, "I was busy building something real. Something that matters. Something that allows me to support causes I believe in." I gestured subtly towards the stage, towards the foundation. "This cause, for example, it matters. And unlike some, I invest where my heart is and where I can make a real difference." Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. The anger was still there, but beneath it, a raw, exposed vulnerability flickered, the shock of being utterly, completely blindsided. She had been so confident in her narrative, so convinced of my limitations, that the possibility of me having this kind of power, this kind of success, was simply outside the realm of her reality. People were whispering, staring. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked intrigued. A few brave souls at nearby tables offered hesitant, awkward applause. The MC, regaining his composure, began talking again, perhaps hoping to drown out the lingering tension. I stood up slowly, deliberately. I didn't need to say anything more. The announcement, my calm presence, and her explosive reaction had said it all. The mask of the disappointing child had been shattered, replaced by the undeniable reality of someone who had quietly achieved far more than anyone in this room, perhaps even including my parents, had ever imagined. I didn't seek out my father. He was still sitting there, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. I simply nodded politely to the people at my table, offered a small, knowing smile to a few faces in the crowd who met my gaze with stunned curiosity, and began to walk towards the exit. The air outside was cool and crisp, a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. I walked away from the gilded cage, from the shattered glass and the spilled wine and the screaming. The knot in my stomach was gone, replaced by a strange mix of exhilaration and emptiness. I had done it. I had faced the dragon and emerged not unscathed, but victorious on my own terms. The revenge was satisfying, yes, a cold, sharp satisfaction that cut through years of accumulated hurt. But the deeper feeling was one of liberation. I had finally, truly, severed the chains of her expectations. Driving home, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold again, but they looked different now. Brighter somehow, like possibility. I had used the system, the very world she inhabited and weaponized, to declare my independence. The money wasn't just money. It was power, leverage, a voice I had finally claimed in a language they understood. The Sterling Legacy Foundation would now have me on its board, or, at least, as a significant influence. I wouldn't just be a name on a donor list. I would be actively involved, ensuring the funds were used effectively, perhaps even steering its direction. It wasn't just an investment. It was a stake in their world on my terms. The quiet of my apartment felt different too. Not lonely, but peaceful. The battle was over, at least this one. The war? Perhaps that would never end. But tonight, I had won a significant engagement. I had taken the narrative my mother had forced upon me and rewritten it, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever seen me through her eyes. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the cornerstone. I was the driving force. The cold satisfaction lingered, a clean edge cutting through the residual ache of the past. It wasn't a joyous triumph, not a fireworks display. It was quieter, deeper. The quiet hum of power. The stillness after the storm has passed, leaving behind not destruction, but a changed landscape. The air I breathed felt lighter, freer. I was no longer hiding. I was simply here, visible, undeniable. If you've ever felt the weight of someone else's expectations, or had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, tell me about it in the comments. I read all of them. And thank you for being here, for listening. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life. Stories about finding your voice, even when it means disrupting everything.